All right, good evening, folks. I'm sure some of you are just getting yourself logged in and situated. First, I want to welcome you to this evening's presentation. My name is Andrew Weir. I'm our Executive Vice President of Business Development here at AmeriVet. I'm lucky enough to have two special guests with me this evening. First, Dr. Alex Cojocar, who's one of our long-term partners here at AmeriVet, and our operations director, Christine Myers. So welcome to you both. And we'll just give everyone just a couple of minutes here just to get themselves organized. Really, the purpose of this presentation tonight is just to give you an overall sense of coming to partnership with AmeriVet and what that journey looks like. And I'm sure a number of you out there are thinking about this, or maybe have thought about this for yourself. And so what we really wanted to do as an organization is show you an in-depth look of what that looks like and give you an opportunity to submit questions directly to one of our partners, myself, and our operations team to get a sense for what is partnership with AmeriVet. Because I know that there's certainly lots of choice out there, and we want to give everybody an opportunity to see what AmeriVet's all about. So thanks again for joining us. We'll get started now. So as I mentioned before, my name is Andrew Weir. And as you can see in the bottom left part of the screen there's my beautiful black lab, aging black lab Scout. He's trying to take a giant bite of my ice cream there. So just by way of background, obviously been a huge animal lover my whole life. But on the business side of things, I've spent a large part of my career in M&A across various healthcare segments, working under the umbrella portfolio of a Canadian-based PE fund by the name of Imperial Capital. So tremendously pleased and proud to be here at this fast-growing organization. Pass it over to Christine to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Myers. I am the Director of Operations for AmeriVet. I joined Hackettstown Animal Hospital in 2009 as a practice manager, and I continued my role there through partnership with AmeriVet. In 2021, I was promoted to area manager in New Jersey and then operations director in 2022. I oversee the operations of 8 practices in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I live in Northwest New Jersey, my husband and 3 children, and I am pictured here with my golden retriever Dash.
Thank you, Christine. And Dr. Cojocar.
Hi, I'm Alex Cojocar. I am at the Hackettstown Animal Hospital in Hackettstown, of course. Married to my wife, Deborah. I have 1 child, Lauren. She's 38 and teaches in Hackettstown also. I work in the hospital with mainly small animals, see some exotic, some other things also. I work with local rescues. We work with CNI organization. I enjoy my practice, working with the clients, working with my staff. We have a few horses left at home. I was breeding Morgans for many years. We're kind of at the end stage of that. I have a lot of my dogs. My dog on the right of myself there is Scarlet, and Tyrion is on the left. They're my heart and joy. I love my dogs, and I enjoy the outdoors, so I have them outdoors with a lot of activities. Thank you for being here, and go Spartans.
Thanks for that plug, Dr. Cojocar. We appreciate that. Thanks to you both for being here. We're really excited about it. So just by way of what we'd like to cover today, really just wanted to give you a sense of, what does a partnership with AmeriVet look like? What are some of the partnership characteristics that we're seeking out there? So, by way of example, Dr. Cojocar has a wonderful practice that he's going to share with us and give us some background on, not only the success that he's built on his own, but also the success that he's had with us as a partner. The second thing that we're gonna get into, and I think really the meat of this presentation, I think you'll find valuable as an audience member is some of the specifics around what goes on in a partnership. There's certainly a lot of operating models out there in various organizations, and given the fact that AmeriVet has grown so quickly, I think it's good to be able to show sort of where we're having success, what makes our model and our operating platform a little bit different, and how have our partners responded. And so this is a real example of what some of those facts and figures will look like. So things like when would you start this process of looking for a partner? Things like when to tell the staff. We're going to get into the specifics of it. We'll talk a little bit about the practice performance. So we have real practice data and numbers here to show you. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about your culture and sort of what a partnership has meant to Dr. Cojocar's culture and what we've done as an organization to really preserve that over time. So really, that's what we're going to try and cover over time. At the end, we're going to make a little bit of time for questions. We did receive several, so thank you for submitting those. Unfortunately, we received too many, and so we kind of had to aggregate them as best we could, but we'll do our best to get to those at the end. So sit back, relax. I hope you enjoy this presentation and provide some value of it. At the end, I'll have my contact information. So if there's more questions or some follow-up, I encourage you to reach out directly to me. So Dr. Cojocar, if you wouldn't mind maybe just taking us through some of the background of your hospital and tell us a little bit about what you built.
This is the hospital itself. It's an older building. It was built in the probably 1935, somewhere in there. There were two other veterinarians prior to me. I had taken this practice over in 1980. So I became the owner at that particular time, been there since then. Hackettstown is pretty much a semi-rural area. Town population surrounding areas, 28 to 32,000 people, a lot of townships and things around the area, pretty much blue collar area, I would say, probably, average median range for most people, just, I'm going to say kind of basic good people. The clinic is pretty much been there for a long time. Well, my staff has been with me at this hospital for a long time. So that's kind of, what the Hackettstown Animal Hospital is.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, just, by looking at the hospital that you built, this is obviously a community where, you value your reputation. And I'm sure that, this staff means a lot to you. And I guess what's not pictured here is all the support staff and all your techs and the various support members here. How many total are you at the hospital?
If I'm not mistaken, Christine, 35?
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right.
And that includes kennel, technician, reception, and the veterinary staff.
Gotcha. And just how many exam rooms do you have right now, Dr. Cojocar?
I'm sorry.
How many exam rooms do you have?
We have three exam rooms. Three exam rooms. Most of the time I try to have two doctors on most days. Some of the days we have three doctors on a rotating area. The doctors, and I think you're running into this in most practices, the doctors don't want to be working 50, 60 hours a week. Right. So most of my staff probably is working anywhere from 30 to 35 hours a week at the most. We spread those hours out between the veterinarians we have now. Right now, Dr. Tominski's gone, Dr. Chris is not working. So we have one other staff member that's coming on board this summer, and I have one veterinarian that works one Saturday a month for me also. So we kind of spread those hours out so they can get family time, plus be able to continue the profession working at the hospital.
Right. Makes sense. A little bit of balance is always nice. So let's talk about, I appreciate you sharing some of the background of your hospital. I think, what we wanted to ask you was, at some point you must have woke up and said, gosh, I don't want to do this on my own. And I'm sure at that point you had a number of different doors you could have walked through. You could have just kept the hospital indefinitely, never seeking partnership or a sale of some kind. you could look to, some kind of a partnership or a corporate support mechanism, or a seller, a buyer rather, or you could look to sell it to your associates. So can you sort of take us through the mindset at the time, which was, I need to make a change here. And then how did you end up walking through the door of, look, I want to find, a corporate organization to help support me? Maybe you can just kind of paint that picture for us.
Sure, I can do that. I'm 70 years old now, so 4 years ago I started AmeriVet. So I started late. I'm talking. I became an AmeriVet when I was 65 to 66. I'd been looking and knew the transition. I said I'd like to be maybe getting out of what I'm doing now. Probably about 4 years, maybe prior to that. Christine and myself we'd looked at a couple of companies along the way, multiple times from year to year, but I really wasn't getting serious until I was getting older. Just as you said, I said, look, I don't necessarily want to do this for the rest of my life or not be responsible for it all. So I said, look, I'd like to end up coming in with either a group or company that could work on the back end, relieve me from some of the management practices, the practice, and let me walk away, but maybe still be involved. My goal was to probably just end up retiring at 65 or 66 and walking away, but starting later like that was not so easy. It also was not easy because my culture to practice is tremendous. I did not want that to fade. I go, just leaving and having somebody coming in and just running the show. I felt that was needed in a slower transition. So that's kind of how that started. And then like I say, we had gone through many companies. We came down to a couple of choices. Thanks to Christine, she was with me along the way and helped me with my choices and gave the guidance of the organizations we were dealing with and what may be the best fit for the hospital at the time.
Right. And so when you landed on AmeriVet, were there some characteristics about the organization that sort of stood out to you against some of the others, or
yes, I mean, we narrowed it down. I narrowed it down to we had narrowed it down to one other company and AmeriVet, and we ended up, of course, making the choice of AmeriVet. And I think it was there was a few items. They were very sincere in what they were offering and letting us keep our staff, not changing the staff. There was a choice of whether you wanted to have the staff knowing what was going on or not. We chose to let them know what was going on. So I thought that was a very good thing that they were going to say, look, you can run your practice the way you want it to be. We'll give you all the guidance on whatever you need on the back end, regardless of what it is, and we'll help you grow. It will help you phase out during the period of time. So I think that was an important item. I think, they were willing to do that. They were coming up front what they were going to do with the staff, how they're going to present it to the staff. It was a very, very good plan. I thought they had a unique plan also in that it wasn't just going to be a buyout, that they buy the practice and they walk away, or I walk away and they have they're in charge of it. They gave the option of buying into the company with percentages, plus me staying to run it, getting some money up front, being part of it and grow with it, which is what I wanted to do. Even though I said I wanted to totally get out and retire, that did not happen. And I'm glad it didn't, because I'm making a slow transition out, phasing myself out with the company like AmeriVet that's helping on the backside. Plus, the culture of the practice has really been able to be maintained, and so I can feel very comfortable leaving or partially leaving at this particular time.
Right. We're going to talk more. I appreciate you sharing that. We're going to talk a little bit more about sort of your experience through, if we kind of come from 30,000 feet down and talk a little bit more about your experience in actually going through that daunting LOI, letter of intent phase, getting through the due diligence. That's really some of the nitty gritty of sort of negotiating your deal. So we're going to touch a little bit more on that coming up here. So I appreciate you giving us some of that perspective. When you partnered with AmeriVet, and we put up some real numbers here, your EBITDA was just shy of 400,000, and your partnership split was 70-30, meaning AmeriVet purchased 70% of the hospital and you actually retained a portion for yourself. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that retained portion? What did that mean to you? And sort of, was there a reason that you settled on 30% versus, maybe 20% or 40%? Can you talk about what that meant to you?
Sure. When I was first getting into this, I had no expectations that I was going to be remaining a partner. Okay. My idea was going to be retire at 65, 66, walk away and be done. So, over the time, I kind of knew, because the way the practice was going, that it was going to have to be a slower transition. And I thought AmeriVet had a very unique partnership design at that particular time. Now, it may be different now. I was able to get some money up front with the 70% purchase, which I invested. The 30% ownership, meant that down the road, there was a possibility of a recap situation with the investment people that may be there, which did occur. In fact, it occurred sooner than what they were anticipating. They were saying, I think 3 to 5 years, and I think it happened in 3 years. All right. So they were right on money on their expectations and what their expected growth was going to be. It was unique for me that I could still work, still having the salary with reduced hours, still have my staff on board, still running it, and still be a part of it and help run it. And again, you're going to get some added financial contributions at the end of that 3, 4, 5 year period. So that was unique, and it ended up being very, very good.
Oh, that's good to hear. It seems kind of like, too, in a way, that you're able to, again, given your age and a lot of the goodwill that you had built up in the hospital that you have, it's sort of a way to sounds like it was kind of a way to kind of secure a big piece of what you had already built, but then reinvest back into yourself, for the future, in a way, is what that kind of sounds like.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, you could build into it, like you said, to grow with it as it goes along, and you get some equity out. So it was a win-win situation, I think, for myself. It was a win-win situation for the hospital staff. I think it was a win-win situation for AmeriVet, because they're able to retain people, the staff, the doctors, and including myself, that can keep the hospital running as they felt it needed to be.
Right. Now, one thing that's a little interesting about what your experience was here financially anyways, was that you experienced something called a recapitalization event, meaning the private equity firm that owned the initial platform sold that group of hospitals that it acquired to another platform, in this case, one private equity group to the other. And, the difference in spread was rather significant. Were you surprised at all with the multiple that you got for that retained ownership piece?
Yeah,
and just how high it was?
It was very good. I started out with a multiple at the beginning. It was based on, I think they based the multiple on EBITDA and part of other things. But and as an owner before, look, I didn't pay too much attention to a lot of this. Okay, I was running it. I want to get old. I want to retire. I want to leave. So and that kind of changed. I was educated as we went along. Thanks to AmeriVet, thanks to Christine, became a little more educated, and lucky we found this partnership, because during the period of time I was able to get my the 70% equity up front, we paid for. They did it over a period of time, so I got some upfront money over the period of time until the next recap was done. There was money that was being paid. At the time, they were doing also distributions at the time, which I'm not sure if AmeriVet is doing that now or not.
Yep.
So we were able to get distributions. I had my upfront equity. And then at the recap, all that, the money that was invested in 30% came back to me in the partnership at the end of that sale.
Right. Gotcha.
I mean, what can you say? So it was all
Yeah.
good.
Put it this way, though, based on the way you're describing it, it sounds like it was very lucrative for you and your family, and ultimately everybody benefited. So I'm happy to hear that.
But I'm not in Vegas or anything, so it was, it was good, but it wasn't like one of these other people. So it was good for me and good for everybody else.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about the timeline, and I think this is something we get a lot of questions about when we're out talking to your peers, which is, I've heard about AmeriVet, or I'm looking for a partner. I've had a friend or a colleague or a classmate that's gone through this. Talk us through this timeline that we have in front of us, because when I see this, it looks like basically from when the light bulb goes off to when you're actually working with a partner like AmeriVet, there's quite a bit of time that goes by. This isn't really like an overnight exercise. So can you kind of take us through the steps here, and from your vantage point, Christine, feel free to jump in here. But yeah, I want to give our viewers and listeners a little bit more perspective on what does it actually take to go through this? When you're starting to think about it, how much time do you need to budget? And what are some of the things that you should be thinking about when you're going through this?
I'll start out, Christine. You can fill in what it is. To be honest with you, I think you need to give yourself, to go through the whole process, a good year. That would be my year, 18 months, somewhere in there, to get your data together, go through the process that's on the board right now, and to go through the things you're going to need to do. Now, realize up to that point in the summer of 2018, I was already doing research with other groups and other companies. And, in the summer of 18, I had already put a couple of years of research into things. So that was just getting to the point to start with AmeriVet.
Right.
All right. So I think you have to give yourself plenty of time. Like I had said, mine was probably 3 to 5 years. Once we started talking a little bit more closely with AmeriVet, probably in the summer of 2018, then I didn't close on all my aspects of the business until the fall of 2019. So, you're talking a good year and a quarter, year and a half, but that's kind of what I would say you're going to need to give yourself. You go through the processes, you go through that, you've got to make sure your paperwork's in order. Thank goodness we were talking about practice managers. Christine was my practice manager at the time, and you just can't do it without those type of partners in the practice and friends in the practice that you have. Submitting all the financials and the information was mind-boggling, and thank goodness for computers, and thank goodness for people that can do that, because I'm not very good at that.
How can you tell us about this? So I want to kind of dig into something here, because again, this is something I think that a lot of sellers aren't totally prepared for, which is, okay, I've found an organization I'm comfortable with. They seem to be genuine. They've got great support. This seems like a good fit. You come to terms on the LOI, you sign that letter of intent, and then the due diligence piece starts. So this is, I think, a portion of the deal that I think, one, it behooves the individual to have a great, lawyer with a lot of deal experience, number one. But number two is, it can be kind of intensive, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. So can you talk about that experience? And I think it's good to be transparent about that, because I think it's something that a lot of veterinarians really don't have any experience with, and rightfully so. It's something that can be complicated, especially if you don't have good advisors. So what was that like for you? You're trying to run the hospital. You've got, a commitment now that you're going to be partnering. Was that stressful? How did you manage that?
Very stressful. If I didn't drink bourbon at the time, I probably started drinking bourbon then. So that, if I could put it that way, it is very stressful. You're trying to run the operations, you're trying to keep the staff on board, and then you try to do all the background information. Paperwork, you have, it's just a matter of finding it. Like I say, your staff can get those together. Moving forward, you have to get your people together, professionals. I can't say enough about having a good lawyer. You have to have a good accountant that's able to work with the numbers that are presented to you, get the financial data you need, the program. I'm going to be laughing at myself here, but the contractual base, the paperwork that's involved is mind-boggling. Okay, it'll make you just put your head down on the table and say, "What am I doing?" And I'll give you a little minor story. We had started working with a particular lawyer at the time, and it was very, very frustrating. I knew it was going to be a long haul. The particular individual just was dragging feet, was just making it more complicated than it was, even though it was. And I got to a point, I called up Christine one day and I said, I don't know if I can do this. It's a great story because she can intervene, but it's a pretty funny story between her and I. And we said, look, we can't do it with this lawyer because it's not going to happen. So we ended up changing gears, and we had gotten references from other people, a couple of people that had worked with AmeriVet before. We interviewed a couple of people and came in with another group of lawyers, and they did a bang up job. They were excellent, had a great staff. They were very good, but you better be able to open up your pocketbook because it's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah. Any idea? Do you remember how much roughly?
Yeah, you're gonna probably be a good $50,000 to $60,000 just to have the lawyers work on your part. So now that was back then. I don't know what it would be today. Again, my contract may be different than somebody else's now, but you're going to need probably $50,000 to $75,000 just to deal with your lawyers. And accounting, I'm going to say, 10 to 20,000, maybe somewhere in there. So financially, that's going to be up front. And that was mind-boggling to me that, look, I'm going to have to put $100,000 into this just to move forward, let alone doing all this work. So you better be decisive in your decisions. You better be willing to move forward, because it's not only going to be stressful, but it's going to be financially stressful because you're going to have to come up with some of these monies to pay some of these people also.
Right. So I think the key takeaways that I heard were, number one, a good bottle of bourbon. Number two, great counsel. And number three is be prepared to set aside some funds to make sure that you've got the right people in your corner, because it's not just as simple as selling one vet to another. There's a lot of complexity involved here, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, and one other thing to add to is not only those, but you are going to have to spend some time away from the practice during this phase, because you're going to have to go over paperwork, you're going to have to sign things, you're going to have to meet with your practice manager, your audit room, whoever's involved, and you're going to be working at the hospital doing your normal practice situation, but then you're going to have a lot of days off that you're going to be doing paperwork. You're going to have a lot of nights. You're going to be doing it. You're going to be on the phone. You're going to be on Zoom now. I don't even think we had Zoom back then, actually. So it's like dinosaur age, But that's another important aspect that you're going to be going through.
That's really helpful. And again, just thinking of our viewers and our listeners here, those are the types of tips. And I think that the takeaways, I think that are important, right, is to be realistic about what does a partnership look like. It's great that there's a financial upside. We talked about that a little bit, but what goes into that? And I think that you did a really nice job at giving us perspective on that. So I want to turn it over to you, Christine, because look, you've been honestly an integral part of not only the practice, but part of AmeriVet's growth story here. And I think what we wanted to kind of dive into is, look, you've got this letter of intent signed, you're starting to go through like really making the marriage, the partnership official here. Now what goes into it? What changes? Are we coming in and painting the walls red and green and blue? Are we telling the staff what to do? How does that all look? How do we actually gain the efficiencies that we say we can? And so maybe you can speak to some of that.
Sure. So to roll back a little bit, when we were interviewing a lot of these companies, the main theme was, what does it look like 30, 60, 90 after close? We wanted to make sure that the staff was going to be taken care of. Dr. Cojocar has done a great job, 40 years of creating and maintaining that culture with his management style, and he's a staple in the community. So he wanted his people and his clients and patients to be cared for. He didn't want the company to come in and change everything and smack their name on the sign out front. So he wanted to maintain that presence that he has. So that was very important. So going through that process, we kept that front of mind. When we narrowed it down to the two companies, we met with, the corporate people and the operations team, and I had some meetings with some of the other, accounts, the accounting team, things like that. So we met with the associate DVMs about 6 months prior to LOI. Dr. Cojocar wanted to give them the kind of, first glance into what his retirement plan looked like, why he was going forward, and what he was doing to make sure that we maintain that culture that we have. So he was basically, committing to them that he would take care of the practice and them. So we signed LOI, paperwork started, and we had a meeting, just a staff meeting, with the staff. Same thing, explaining why we're doing this and what we're looking for. We waited till after LOI because we wanted the staff to be able to kind of do their own, investigation of AmeriVet and see, kind of get their questions ready and things like that. And then prior to close, we had a big meeting offsite where we had people from the ops team and BD team come in and just let everybody pellet questions at them, what's going to change for me? So that was very helpful to the team because they got to see the face of AmeriVet and who would be working with us on a daily basis, really. So
when you kind of decided, okay, I'm making this public, and the AmeriVet team's on site, what was the vibe? Like what kinds of questions were you getting? Was it excitement? Was it trepidation? What was the sentiment in the room? What was the feeling?
Right. I would say mostly it was nervousness. People, even though we say very little will change, I think that people, we've seen in the past a lot of animal hospitals in our area. They've gone, to different consolidators and we know them intimately and things haven't gone so well for them, essentially. So they were nervous that we were going to go down the same path, even though we committed that we wouldn't allow that to happen. So it was a little nervousness. We're all pretty honest and upfront with each other. And I think that setting of the expectations is key. So most of the questions surrounded what's going to change for me personally. So is my schedule going to change? What are my benefits going to be? Things like that. So it was, is my life going to get better or worse or stay the same due to this? So it was mostly personal, wondering what's going to happen to them personally. And then, I had kind of greased the skids with them and said, your day-to-day won't change as much as you think it's going to. I took the brunt of most of the change in the beginning, but for them specifically, it was the pay schedule. We were paying weekly. We moved to a bi-weekly schedule, and we were able to make it work for them so they didn't miss out on pay or have to wait another week to be paid. Their, clock in and clock out process was a little different. We had new credit card terminals, but everything else remained the same as far as the front desk duties. And, so their day-to-day didn't change. They still came in. We didn't make them change their scrub color, or like you said, paint the walls red, or change the sign. And at the time, our operations team did a great job of kind of backing off a little bit and letting the dust settle for the first week or so, and letting us just kind of cruise through how we've been doing it. So I think that delicate walking that tightrope during close is very important, because if we close and you get 10 AmeriVet people coming in and telling you what to do, it's very stressful. So we made sure, I had worked with my, at the time, operations director to say, here's how I feel the staff would best acclimate to this. And we went down that path, and it was fine. We did not lose one employee due to the transition. So, and that's to this day. I mean, we've had just a little turnover due to other things, but as far as AmeriVet joining the team, us joining AmeriVet's team, we haven't lost anybody due to that. Practice manager role was a little different, just your daily things you're used to doing. How do I pay a bill? How do I approve time cards? How do I process payroll? That changes. So there's a bit of a learning curve there. But other than that, that's the change that I saw in my role as practice manager there.
Talk a little bit about, I think you touched on this a little bit, but what has been, again, this labor market, and I think anybody listening in today, we all kind of are in the same boat, which is it's not easy out there right now to recruit. It's not, there's no magic wand, there's no magic formula. So looking at some of the numbers here, looks like, a few new key staff members, but maybe talk a bit about the success that you've had there in recruiting and getting people to join this wonderful hospital culture here.
Sure. So we have, 35 employees about, and they all range from kennel staff all the way up to our DVMs. So, when we were looking at Dr. Cojocar's kind of succession plan, looking at what we wanted to do with him, he wanted to stay in the practice. He wanted to practice, but maybe at a lesser capacity. He wanted to start dialing down. So we didn't want to scare the staff and say that, Dr. Cojocar's leaving us. So we searched for someone, a DVM, who we thought could maybe take over the medical director components of the practice. The current DVMs there didn't want to do it. They're in their kind of twilight of practicing. So they weren't interested in it. So we worked with recruiting to say, here's what we're looking for in a DVM. We had a total of 7 candidates come through. We hired 3 of them. And, trying to just plan for the future before it hits us. So like I said, the staff's been there a very long time. They're dedicated to the practice and Dr. Cojocar. And, we want to make sure that the staff we have, wants to be there, is happy to be there, and we can support them. So, our DVMs, we try to make sure that we allow them to practice the medicine that they want to. If one of the doctors wants a certain drug, we can get that for them. And that helps them support us.
What happens? Okay, so theoretically, you have this wonderful staff, a maternity leave, or you have, somebody quits. Okay, well, now the partnership's there. Who does Dr. Cojocar call? Who does the PM call? Like, how does that work? Does AmeriVet have a recruiting function? What does that look like? What's the involvement of the practice at that point?
Sure. So the recruiting function is there. We have each region has kind of their own dedicated recruiter who gets to know the practice, gets to know the staff a little bit. So when they're going out and sourcing DVMs, they can find the right fit to bring to the practice. In the end, the choice was Dr. Cojocar's, who the candidates he wanted to bring into the practice. They don't force a candidate down your throat to say, no, he applied, you have to hire him. So we were able to go through and say, well, we don't feel this person would be a good fit. So we relay our needs, really. We meet with the recruiting team and say, here's what we're looking for. And they do their best to go find it. And, there have been times where we weren't quite sure. So we've said, what, we're not sure, but we will still kind of interview and see who's coming in depending. So we try to plan for that as early as possible. Some things we can't plan for. But, the recruiting team is very supportive, and they'll come out and they'll kind of screen the DVM first, and we have a technician recruiting function as well, so they will do the same thing. If you want them to, they'll do the first initial call and report back to what they discussed. In the end, we bring that candidate in, and the final decision is on the practice as to who they want to bring onto the team.
Right. And so it sounds like a lot of the heavy lifting of, sourcing candidates and putting the postings out and doing some of the initial screening, a lot of heavy lift is done by AmeriVet, but then ultimately the real decision around, is this a good fit for our culture, ultimately comes back to the doctor and the clinical team. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's really helpful. And I think for the folks that are listening here, I think those are questions that we get on a regular basis, which is, how much control do I have over who's actually going to be working in my hospital? And again, I have this beautiful culture and I've worked for 35, 40 years building it. I don't want it to be altered by, some corporate entity coming and bringing in, somebody that they think just because they think it's a good fit. So I'm glad to hear that that's not the case. It's actually a great segue because, and I'm glad we have you on the call, Christine, because you've kind of seen this from both lenses, obviously being in the practice, but now having a comparator to looking at a number of other practices that I know you're responsible for. So maybe you can just take us through the story here. What I'm seeing is, a healthy practice that's shown some significant but steady growth over the last several years. And I'm also seeing on the cost management side a nice reduction in overall costs and some nice synergy there. So maybe you can kind of, and Dr. Cojocar, feel free to chime in, but these are the nice interplay between revenue and cost of goods that we like to see. I think one thing that I kind of took away from this just objectively was there's no huge spikes or dips in this. And I think that's something that, working at the practice, the folks there might agree that, because there weren't massive cultural changes or huge changes right off the bat, you're not going to see big spikes or dips either way. So to me, this indicates a very healthy growth pattern and also a very healthy bottom line that's been adjusted over time. So maybe you can just kind of help tell that story a little bit.
Sure. So for the revenue component, prior to AmeriVet, I was responsible for getting those numbers together, meeting with Dr. Cojocar monthly and quarterly and annually to review those numbers and pull them and figure out, which services were the revenue generators, what should we add, things like that. So prior to partnership, I would do that, plus handle the HR issues and all the other issues going on in accounts payable. So the thing that I like is that when we partnered, some of those other responsibilities were reduced. And I was able to focus more on the revenue. I was able to get some really great reports. I didn't have to put the P&L together and look at it. And I could just have everything in a snapshot. So I think for the revenue growth, of course, it's all in the back of the DVMs, bringing that growth in. But we could focus more on kind of strategic things with AmeriVet helping me do that. So we started at 2.3, and we slowly grew over the years. Of course, we have a little bit of like a COVID bump, like I think most people did. But now we sit at 2.9 in 22, and we're trending, upwards for 2023. So it's just that constant, evolving with the economy and making things work. And, we had a lot of things thrown in our way with COVID and some doctors being out and things like that. So it's just kind of being hyper-focused on the numbers and using AmeriVet operations team, finance team to say, hey, I need some help with this, and go that way. The good story, the one of the success stories that we have is the cost of goods decline. So like I said before, we had a tremendous amount of inventory in our practice. So at partnership, we were upwards of 30%. After partnership, we started to streamline our inventory. We got it down to 22% in 2022, right? Is it? Yeah. So it took some time to get that down. We didn't do just a quick, slash of all of our inventory. We did this by utilizing the corporate partnerships through AmeriVet. We have some programs like the Power of 20, which is an inventory reduction program, consolidation program. And then also it was great to go to other practice managers in the AmeriVet network and get their best practices. So we've been able to reduce that number, the spend as it relates to revenue, you know, as a percentage of our revenue. And now year to date, we're at 20% at the practice, which I never thought we'd get to be honest with you, but we're there and we're right in line with the benchmarks of in the industry. So, and that's, you know, kudos to our inventory manager, the current practice manager at the practice, and kind of coming together and utilizing and really taking advantages of the programs that were made available to us. And that was also part of the reason why we chose AmeriVet, because we had those opportunities there to make a difference.
Right. Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, AmeriVet is continuing to grow its procurement capabilities and sort of becoming a little bit stronger in that regard. So I'm imagining that you're able to take advantage of some of those procurement synergies and some of the cost savings on just a variety of basket of goods there. So pleased to see that. Talk to us a little bit about you know, this is again I think a really nice story around how the practice grew, again very organically through the last several years. And Dr. Cojocar, we talked about the recapitalization that occurred throughout that growth period. So the practice was growing, one PE firm sold to another shop, and the practice continued to grow. So I think, you know, part of the reason why we put this in there is, look, you know, the performance of the practice didn't suddenly change all of a sudden. You know, we were continuing to see this nice steady growth stream. So maybe you can just kind of give us a quick little story on what that looked like from your perspective.
Me or Dr. Cojocar?
Well, either of you. I mean, I think Dr. Cojocar, what I find interesting about your story is you're not getting any younger, are you? And you know, you've almost doubled you know, the EBITDA of your practice. So I mean, congratulations to you both. Did you feel like you were working harder to do this? I guess is the big question, right? I mean, like, that's no small feat, and it's no small feat to do late in your career. So A, could you do this on your own? And B, what was it like doing that? Were you working harder?
I don't think I'm working any harder. I've reduced some of the things, so I feel I'm able to do that. The help of AmeriVet with, you know, helping with inventory, helping with COGS, setting price aspects, you know, where all those back things really help. Okay. You know, as I mentioned, you know, I wasn't that great of a manager. I just ran the practice. Christine helped run it. I wasn't, you know, I really didn't care about COGS. I didn't care about inventory. I just was there. So that could be good and bad. And it was ended up being good in this, you've seen this growth because now you pay attention to it and you can see really what can happen when you're well managed. And that would not have happened on my own. That was due to the work of the staff, the administration, Christine, and AmeriVet. Okay. Give us a guidance of what we could do to do that, which you can see has really happened. So no, I'm not working any harder. I just think that back end has helped and helped just retune the hospital, keeping what you need to do there with the culture, keep running the hospital, but have improvements on some of the things that we're seeing here, EBITDA, COGS, inventory, whatever it may be.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for sharing that perspective. For those of you that are looking at, you know, what is AmeriVet? I mean, we have not been around as long as some of the other folks in the market, but have had a tremendous start and a tremendous growth story to date. So we're just over to, we just closed our 201st deal. just last week, and we're excited to bring on several new partners this year. We're spread all over the US. To give you some perspective, though, our growth trajectory has been rather significant over the last several years. Obviously, COVID has played a role in that, but I can tell you that we're still on pace to continue growing at a very fast rate, and we're very much still in the market looking for partners. I think part of the purpose of this presentation was to give you an example of the types of practices that we seek, and give you some perspective on who we are and what our growth story looks like. And Christine, you'll probably appreciate this slide, which is, what kinds of services and support do we offer? And that just seems to be growing, honestly, by a month by month basis. We seem to be adding new resources, be they personnel and expertise, be they better supplier relationships and pricing, be they better mentorship and clinical training for doctors. So AmeriVet has done a really nice job at reinvesting back into their end of the partnership to create more strength and robustness for the partners that ultimately preserves the culture, but allows them to grow in an organic way. For those of you who are curious, AmeriVet, we've talked a little bit about this joint venture model. This is sort of that shared ownership model where AmeriVet owns a piece of the business and you keep a piece of the business for yourself post-partnership. And really that's been the foundation of our growth success, is having partners that are invested into their practice and want somebody or an organization to help them grow it to a greater level. And I think we've done a nice job today at showing you an example of what that can look like in a very real sense. So without going into too much more detail on that, if you have questions about the partnership or what that can mean for you, I want you to reach out directly to me. I'll be fielding those inbound responses myself personally. But just before we wrap up here, I did mention at the start of the call, if we had a little bit of extra time, that we would answer some of your questions. And so I teased out a few of them that I think fell into some pretty large categories that I think would make sense for us to answer here. So maybe Dr. Cojocar, I know you touched on this before, but one of the big questions we always get is how far in advance you start researching a partnership. What makes sense?
I think, I did it, like I mentioned to you, probably 3 to 5 years. I think you need to be thinking about that at least that period of time. You could do your own due diligence, look at the different places, people, different corporations. It will take you that amount of time just to go through it. But I think more importantly, it's the time that you do that. All right. I was a little late, being 65, 66 when, we ended up with the partnership. I had started in my early 60s to do that, but I think somebody on an individual base, if you're in a practice and have it, I think you should start earlier. I mean, if I was doing it over again and I knew I wanted to retire down the road, I would have probably started when I was 55, 56, have that growth take place, work on that for the next 3 to 5 years. You're 60, 62. Then by that time, you can decide if you want to stay on board, work part-time, work full-time, whatever you want to do, and not have to worry about the back end of the management selling the practice. So I think it's more important the time that you start that as how long you think it's going to take you to do it. Okay, so I think that's important. So I think that would be, I think, the most important. I think start earlier, and I think will benefit both AmeriVet with starting that and also the doctors that are involved.
Right. Yeah. And I think, as mentioned earlier, I mean, obviously, the later you're getting into your career, there's potential future risks, even personally, if there's health risks that goes along with that. I mean, you're really, it sounds like, in a way, buying yourself an insurance policy, against if anything were to happen to you or the practice or whatever, at least you've secured a piece of that. You've sort of crystallized the value of it, or the vast majority of it, and allowed yourself an opportunity to continue practicing safely, while tucking away, taking a few chips off the table and tucking something away for yourself. So I think that's good advice. I appreciate you sharing that. The second question we got was, what financial benefits are from, so what's in it for my staff, what's in it for my associates, more importantly. So I mean, just generally, AmeriVet is investing heavily into mentorship, into clinical development. We really see the future with the younger generation, so we're putting a lot more infrastructure around supporting them and their growth clinically. We're very excited about that. On the financial end, so when we do look at a partnership, there are a number of different mechanisms we have in place, not only to retain, but also reward associates for participating in the growth of the practice. So these can be anything from an equity grant from the owner to more tax efficient vehicles such as profits, interest, and that type of thing that allow them to receive regular distributions as if they were an owner in the practice and participate in any future recapitalization events as well. So lots of options. The partnership model is flexible. I think that's one piece of feedback that we get quite often is we're very flexible. We're able to design a partnership that meets both the needs of the veterinarian, but also, satisfies any of the younger, sort of more up and coming associates. So they can feel like they're participating in the partnership as well. And that's also very important to us that we have engaged staff and engaged future leaders. So I appreciate that question. And finally, Christine, we'll wrap up after this, but how involved should my PM be during this process? I assume that means during this partnership process.
So I was involved from the very beginning, from talking to, half a dozen companies. So I feel like if you have an involved practice manager, involving them in the very beginning, it just helps to add, there were certain things that Dr. Cojocar and I, disagreed on or didn't see eye to eye on. And we went through some, kind of kicked the ball around and figured out what we want, what he wanted for himself and what the vision of what we saw as the vision of the practice. So I think the practice manager should be highly involved when it comes to the paperwork and that arduous process of getting it all together and communicating with the accountants and the attorneys and the, everybody else involved, just getting that paperwork in. So to me, I feel like the practice manager should be involved from the very beginning and help you make that decision.
Can I put 2 cents in on that?
Absolutely.
I think it'd be a total mistake not to have your practice manager involved. You don't need to be doing that as a veterinarian, also managing, doing the back work plus what you're working. But you also have to have a trust in that. There's a lot of numbers that are out there. A lot of people aren't willing to share. Christine and I were very transparent through those situations. She knows more about my life, I think, than my wife does. So, that may be good or bad. But if that trust comes into play, you have to have somebody that you can depend on. Christine has always been very trustworthy and right to the point, and so it's been a blessing to have her on board. But I hope everybody has a practice manager, as I did, as great of a one that I did have and still have. So I think it's very important for your growth. You're not going to have to do a lot of that paperwork yourself. Let them get involved and let them help you and share it. So that would be my advice.
Appreciate your insight. And speaking of blessings, it's certainly been one to have both you, Dr. Cojocar, and Christine here on the call today. I know just how busy everybody is, and those who are listening and participating. We thank you for participating in this short little webinar, and I hope you learned something. Again, this was meant to be sort of an opportunity to learn more about partnership, to hear from one of our partners and our operations team, just the real story. And if you have further questions or you'd like to ask directly to Dr. Cojocar or Christine, I encourage you to reach out to me, and we're happy to make those connections. So thanks for joining us, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Take care.